Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the second issue in the original Team 7 miniseries with Team 7 number 2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in November of 1994, I would like to start off by saying that if you have not watched my video on Team 7 number 1, I suggest you do so before watching this video, as this is a continuing linear narrative, so this video is not going to make a whole lot of sense if you haven't seen the first one. Here on the cover, we can see an image of the team in a hospital-like facility. We see Lynch here lying in the middle, unconscious, while there is an image of Kraven above him looking maniacal. It's a pretty cool image, though it seems like my camera is a little bit upset about the way that the faux scan lines exist, as if this is some type of screen, so I don't know how well it's trying to focus in on this or if it's causing any issues, but I apologize if it is. Story: Chuck Dixon. Pencils: Aaron Weisenfeld. Inks: J.D. Scott Williams. Letters: Bill Oakley. Colors: Monica Benet. Color assistant: Wendy Fouts on most but not all of the pages. Computer colors: Ollie Optics. Production: Wildstorm Effects. Assistant editor: Sarah Becker. Editor-in-chief: Bill Kaplan. Cover art: Aaron Weisenfeld and Trevor Scott. We can see here on the first page that there is a squad of soldiers who are combing over the wreckage. One is getting a transmission from this helicopter asking if it's clear to land. He tells him to go ahead and that they're trying to basically clean up the area after the events of the first issue where Team 7 was sent in to infiltrate a biolab. And keep that in mind, they knew that they were infiltrating a biolab. I went back and double checked, and that's going to be relevant later on. Also, remember that this miniseries takes place in roughly the mid-1970s, which is why the soldiers are wearing a more time period correct garb. And also, these soldiers are depicted carrying very realistic firearms, which is not the case with a lot of the firearms that are carried by the Team 7 team itself. As the chopper lands, we see Kraven exit the chopper with a couple of Green Berets flanking his left and right side, and he is joined not far behind by a new character by the name of Gabriel. Kraven wants Gabriel to basically be in charge of the Gen 12 project, which is what's being done to Team 7 here. As they make their way through all the rubble and dead bodies, Kraven states that he was never going to leave this up to anyone else but himself to oversee this extraction, and then Gabriel to take over the operations once they get the members of Team 7 back to base. As they move through, Gabriel asks if the pet general of Kraven is going to be upset about losing so many soldiers, but Kraven assures him that he won't care, as these men were all conscripts to begin with. As we see, it's just a horrifically gory scene of bodies piled up everywhere. One of them, still alive, tries to reach for a gun, but he is immediately killed by one of the Green Berets that was with Kraven and Gabriel. And Kraven states that he wants no survivors and that no one can know that this was a setup, not any of their enemies nor any of their allies. And he explicitly states to Kraven that Team 7 especially can never find out that this was a setup from the start. As Kraven and Gabriel approach the facility where we saw Team 7 collapse in the end of the last issue, they are interrupted by a team of men wearing some sort of hazmat style suits who tell them to stay where they are, as there are still gen factor bugs, as they're called, active in the air, and that they need to stay back until they finish spraying down the entire area with neutralizing agents. Kraven then asks if the team survived, and the man tells him, if you can call it that. He said that they're monitoring the situation and keeping sure that their vitals are still intact. But right now, they're all kind of down for the count, as we see that the members of Team 7 are being put into what look to be some sort of hyperbaric chambers of some sort and being loaded onto the back of a truck. Two of the men are accounted for here, as they are Berkman and Johnson. We then see here on this page Cole Cash, who we know will become Grifter in the future and join the Wildcats team. However, when he was a member of Team 7, he was apparently called Deadeye. We then see Michael Cray, who, as we know, is Deathblow. If you'd like to know more about Wildcats, you can check out my Wildcats playlist. If you'd like to know more about Deathblow, you can check out my Deathblow playlist. We then see Stephen Callahan, who is Wraparound. Callahan is the father of Threshold, who we've met in the Gen 13 miniseries. If you'd like to know more about Gen 13, check out my Gen 13 playlist. We then have Jackson Dane, who is Albright, and also the leader of Wetworks. If you want to know more about Wetworks, check out my Wetworks miniseries. We then get Stuart Chang, who is Bullet Eater. Stuart Chang is the father of Grunge from Gen 13. We then have Richard, how do you pronounce that? McNamara, I believe. He's Bowl Around. Mark Slayton, who is Backlash. As we know, he shows up in Stormwatch. If you want to know more about Stormwatch, check out my Stormwatch playlist. Then Alexander Fairchild, who is Slaphammer. He, of course, is the father of Caitlin Fairchild in Gen 13. And we, last but not least, have John Lynch, who is known by Topkick. And if you want to know more about Lynch, basically just check out any of my videos or playlists about literally any Wildstorm titles, as he shows up in pretty much all of them. We are then teleported to some sort of medical facility where we see Lynch shooting up out of bed, screaming, "It's a setup, oh god, they nailed us," and then realizing where he's at, puts his head into his hands and begins to wonder exactly what happened, as he is consoled by a doctor who tells him he's safe now. He recognizes the doctor as someone he knows named Alicia, who we're led to believe is the lead medical practitioner at this facility. He begins to ask her a bunch of questions about, what happened to the rest of the team, how did the mission go wrong. She begins to give an explanation when she is cut off by none other than Craven, who tells her that it's his job to debrief Lynch on the mission and that she has other patients to attend to. As she begins to exit the room, we see Craven sit down and begin to pilfer through the food that was brought in for Lynch. Lynch stands up and begins to disconnect all of the monitoring equipment. Craven tells him that he doesn't think that's a good idea, as Lynch isn't fully out of the woods yet, but Lynch ignores him and continues to get dressed and asks Craven what exactly went wrong. Craven states that they knew it was a weapon, but they weren't sure that it was biological, and that the information that they had was incomplete, and apologizes to Lynch for getting them in over their head. Lynch, of course, saw footage of this weapon in the first issue, and when it was used, all of the people who were exposed to it instantly went feral and started ripping each other apart. So the fact that, Team 7 didn't go into a blood rage when exposed to this and kill each other is kind of showing that they were a little bit better off than the last people that saw this weapon. He asks, how the rest of the team are doing. Craven tells him that, some are doing pretty bad, but some of them are in even better shape than Lynch. But he states that they're all soldiers and they're all super tough, so they should be just fine, as we are then teleported back to a different part of the facility where we see a security guard outside of a room and Alicia asking how he's doing. As they look inside of the room through the window in the door, we find out that the man inside is none other than Berkman, who, after being exposed to the gen particles, or gen bugs as they're called, he apparently completely lost his mind and ripped his own eyes out, which is why he has to be bound at all times so that he doesn't kill himself. Alicia asks if this is necessary, but the guard tells her, what other choice do we have? But suddenly they're interrupted by a commotion down the hallway in one of the other rooms, as McNamara is inside, and suddenly all of the guards crowding around realize that the worst is about to happen, as they state he's about to, and then they're cut off by an explosion where we see all of their bodies basically being vaporized. Alicia and the guard accompanying her run over to the door to see what's happened. McNamara's room is now, basically glowing in light. The security guard screams it's a code red. They need everybody to the second level immediately. As we see two other guards join them outside of the room and look in, McNamara is glowing with some sort of a pink aura. They don't know exactly what it is. One man states that, he's glowing, and the other one says he's going to be bleeding after I put a bullet in him. They rush inside, and McNamara tells them to get away. He can't control it, but before they have time to retreat, he unleashes another huge blast of enemy, which just rips all of the guards to pieces in a pile of gore and blood, as we see a large ka-choom comic book explosion sound, and it's not looking good for McNamara or Berkman at this point. They seem to not be doing too well after being exposed to the Gen particles. We then see McNamara reach over to grab a pistol that was dropped by one of the security guards, stating that he can't control the pain and there's only one way to end it, as he puts the barrel of the gun to the base of his chin. Alicia tries to plead with him to stop and tells him that it isn't worth it. However, he responds by saying after this, hell is going to seem like a cool dip in the pool, as he closes his eyes and we see a close-up of Alicia's face and a loud blam where blood splatters across her glasses, and we realize that McNamara has decided to end his own life instead of continue on with his own suffering. Later on, in a different part of the facility, which apparently is a skyscraper in the middle of a city, though we don't know which city at this point, we see a meeting between Gabriel and Craven. Craven seems somewhat irritated that Gabriel wanted to meet face-to-face instead of just giving him a call. Gabriel tells him that he wants off the project, and Craven asks him if it's because of his own Gen Factor abilities, which make him more attuned to the feelings of others. And this is the point where we find out that Gabriel is in fact Gen active. And Gabriel tells him that it's because the men are in such mental anguish, and that's why the painkillers aren't working, as because it's all, psychosis that they're dealing with. But Craven tells him to toughen up, and he needs someone that he can trust in charge of this, and that Gabriel, with his own Gen Factor powers, is the only one who's capable of doing the job. Gabriel turns around and states, this is why, he doesn't want to be part of this anymore. He can't deal with all of this pain and suffering, especially with the men down on level 9. Craven responds by saying there is no level 9, and Gabriel says that's what he hates most about this part of the job. It's not just the fact that they're doing things that he finds detestable, but also the constant lying, not only to the men of Team 7 and other members of the facility that they're in, but also to themselves. And as he turns around, he states that he's going to continue with the project, but he does not like where it's headed. We then see, presumably at a later point in time, a meeting occurring between Craven, Gabriel, Alicia, and the members of Team 7 who want answers. Craven starts off the meeting by basically just lying to everyone's face and telling them that the men who didn't survive either died on the mission or later succumbed to their own injuries that were sustained on the mission, because, of course, he doesn't want to let them know what happened to Berkman or McNamara. Dane interrupts and asks, what exactly happened? How did they get into such a precarious place in the first place? And Craven takes the blame for that one, stating that his intel was bad, another lie, and tells Dane that they thought that they knew more than they did, and that some of their information was just ill-gained, and that's why everything kind of went sideways on the mission. As other members of the team start to speak up and ask what's going on, Craven begins to, tell them that, we're still sorting things out. We don't know exactly what's going on with all these abilities you're getting. We're trying to do some testing. And then he's interrupted by none other than Cole Cash, aka Grifter in the future. And Grifter states that he's lying. And Cole states then that, you're lying directly to us. You knew exactly what you were sending us into. And Craven realizes that Cash is actually scanning his mind and tells Gabriel to stop him. And then we see Cash looking very angry, stating, lying once again, as we see Craven's nose begin to bleed, and he pleads with Gabriel to stop him. Gabriel then interrupts and states that what he means is that there's a lot of things that they don't know yet, and there's a lot more tests that need to be conducted before they can give all the men full answers as to what's going on with their bodies. And we then see one of the other team members lean in and ask Cash what's happening. Cole states, though, that it's like he was reading Kraven's thoughts, but then was suddenly cut off. And Gabriel states that, it's going to be standard protocol while all of the testing is being conducted. All the men will have to stay at the facility with limited contact to their families, but that they all know the drill and that this will come to an end shortly enough once everything's been figured out. Of course, he's just trying to lay cover for Kraven's actions and keep the men from basically revolting against the whole thing and fighting their way out of the facility. We're then teleported to a different part of the facility where we see Michael Cray, aka Deathblow, involved in a test where he says circle is told is wrong, square, he's told it's wrong again, triangle, and then Alicia says you're guessing. Cray, of course, then gets really upset, rips the electrodes off of his head, and says, well, what the hell is this? It's just a guessing game altogether. Alicia then states that so far he's the only member of the team who isn't exhibiting any kind of psychic abilities or, enhanced strength or any kind of weird, odd powers. And Cray gets really upset about this, picks up the chair he was sitting in and throws it through the glass window that separated the two of them. Alicia's rather distraught by this, and Cray yells through the window, what, so because I didn't get turned into some kind of Martian, I'm the one who's letting the team down? Which is kind of a funny response. We then see that the next page is going to be a pinup, and it's done by Jeff Rebner and Chuck Gibson. We then see the pinup is an image of Kraven standing in front of a giant video screen that depicts Team 7 after a mission, all covered in blood and gore and soot, lighting cigarettes, looking all like they're real badasses. It's actually a pretty cool pinup. I do like it. It's kind of a good indication of exactly just who the men of Team 7 were before all this, and, how highly decorated of a covert ops team they really are. On the next page, we see an advertisement for Warblade Endangered Species, which was a team-up miniseries with Warblade and Ripclaw. Also, I'd like to point out that I'm very, happy about the fact that both sides, or both of the back sides of the pinup, are just advertisements, and the pinup itself is the center page, which means that if you ever wanted to take it out and hang it on your wall, you could without destroying the comic book. The next page is an ad for Deathblow issues number 11 and 12, which will feature Dane, Grifter, and Backlash from Team 7 as people who are coming to the help of Michael Cray. As of recording this video, I haven't quite made it to Deathblow issues number 11 and 12, but have no fear, I'll get there eventually. You just got to stick with me, folks. Back into the story, we see then a video feed of the room that Deathblow was in as he walks away from the broken glass, telling Alicia, don't piss on my head and tell me it's sunshine, which is not at all how that saying goes, but that's hilarious. And then we see Kraven, who was watching the video feed, stating, it's not your time, Deathblow, you were meant for bigger things. Later on, in another part of the facility, one of the bunk rooms shared by some of the men, we see Lynch being very impressed by the abilities of Chang as he's disassembled a gun into all of its different pieces. And Chang says, Lynch, you didn't get some of the touch yourself. And Lynch explains that he did get a mild form of prescience, which essentially he can kind of see the future, but not in a way that's really meaningful or will ever give him an ability to use it in the field. But he states that's okay and says, hey, Chang, look at what you're able to do. Chang's like, yeah, it is kind of cool, but he's worried about what Grifter said in the meeting that they had, or Cash at this point. Lynch states that he doesn't think that what Cash saw was real. He states that, Kraven's got 1,000,001 Black Ops secrets in his head, and if Cash did see something that led him to think that, Kraven had betrayed them, that he was just misinterpreting the information, as we see Chang continuing to reassemble the gun. And Lynch states that there's no way that their own people would have set them up. But Chang reminds him that since that meeting, they haven't seen Craven once in the facility, and it makes a guy wonder as he continues and completes the reassembling of the revolver, which brings up another point that whoever drew this, well, not whoever, Weisenfeld, when he drew this, he's someone who absolutely knows nothing about guns, because there is not a revolver on planet Earth that is made up of this many pieces and has two pieces of a frame that screw together. That's not how revolvers are built, people, not even a little bit. We're then teleported down to level 9 of the facility, the level that Craven stated did not exist, as we see Gabriel punching in a code that opens a giant mechanical door. As he begins to walk down a seemingly abandoned hallway, we see his name being uttered. He says no as he flies back in pain with blood coming out of his mouth. He then grabs his head with both hands as he tries to escape out of the hallway, as we see his name being uttered again, and then see inside of one of the windows of one of the rooms a horribly disfigured looking creature that we're led to believe is probably a man, as we see his name being uttered again and blood splattering against the wall. We're not sure if this is or is not the end of Gabriel. Later on, in another part of the facility, we see Cole sitting around in his room as Alicia enters and states that Cole missed his appointment. He says there's really no point and he doesn't need Alicia digging around in his skull anymore. He states that, you know, something's not right here, but none of that matters as they're going to be put back into the field again. And Alicia, you know, says that, look, I'm sorry, but he cuts her off, stating that the apologies are unnecessary and that once they're back out in the field, they'll know their place in the world again and be where they're supposed to be. The next day, we see the men back in action as they are in the middle of a mission in some West African country where they're in charge of killing the general who is the dictator over this country and basically ushering in a regime change. Not too different from what America's been doing for the last 20 years. And we see that they're also armed to the teeth with ridiculous, impossible sci-fi guns as, you know, Deathlow's carrying whatever the hell this is supposed to be, and Dane has also got some kind of giant future sci-fi weapon. However, for some reason, Cash has just got a revolver and what looks to be a grenade, as we see Lynch yell out, you know, Dane, Cray, bring up the rear, bring up the big guns, we need support, and they seem to be back in their, you know, original fighting form, doing what they do best. We then see Dane and Deathblow continue to open fire as Dane tells Deathblow that everyone in the area is a confirmed hostile and they don't have to worry about any friendlies. This makes Deathblow pretty happy as he continues to shoot this gun that makes no sense. We can see the bullet strap coming up out of the water, which, by the way, you don't want to get your ammo wet. And it feeds up into the top section of the gun, which would make you believe that it would shoot out of the top barrel, but it doesn't. It shoots out of the bottom. Why? I don't know. Dane's got whatever the hell this is, some kind of grenade launcher thing, but there were pump-action grenade launchers during the 70s. It was the China Lake. It bothers me so much. Meanwhile, the base that they're storming is just getting blown apart. Men are dying everywhere as they were all basically just a bunch of thugs who got comfortable beating up on the local population. Team 7 charges forward and decides to make their full assault as they have to get to the center tower to take out the general. We see Deathblow and Dane continuing to lay down suppressing fire. My God, this gun makes no sense. Look how gigantic it is. I don't care how big and strong Dane is. This gun would be unwieldy. There's huge explosions as they blast open the gate and the rest of the team pours in. We see Johnson and Lynch and Cray move to take point on the tower as they run forward, taking out enemy soldiers along the way. And, you know, things are going pretty smooth so far as the team seems to be having no trouble on their first mission back in the field. However, this is the point at which Johnson seems to be a little bit too into the mission and a little bit too excited about killing a general, as he kicks through the door with nothing but a pistol in hand and starts to move through the tower as a one-man killing squad, executing every person he sees along the way, stating, "General, you home?" As he continues to leave a trail of carnage in his wake, we see Lynch and Cash come in behind. Lynch says that he's losing it, but Cash says, no, he's all right, man. We've all changed, and when you wake up one morning and you've got the ability to pick up a Buick by just thinking about it, it changes your outlook. However, when they get up to the top of the tower and make their way to the door of the general's office, they hear Johnson stating, "Go ahead, do it," and we hear a blam. Then he states to the next guy, "All right, now it's your turn." We hear another blam. As they look inside, they overhear Johnson saying, "All right, General, it's your turn now. Make sure you do me proud." And they're a little bit stunned by what they're seeing. As we're finally shown the interior of the general's office, we see Johnson kicking back in the general's chair, popping a bottle of champagne, and the general, who has taken his pants off, standing with a gun pointed at his own head. Then we hear Johnson tell him to go ahead and pull the trigger and to smile for him while he does it. The general asks for mercy, but Johnson says, "Come on, smile." As we see the general smile big and say joy, we then hear a loud blam as he pulls the trigger, and Lynch is in complete shock at what he's just witnessed. We then see Johnson stand up and say, "Guys, we could have phoned this one in. All I did was tell these guys to off themselves, and they all did it just because I said so. It's a kick. You got to try it." As he smiles and continues to drink the champagne, we then see a gun cocking and a hailstorm of bullets rip through Johnson as he blasts out through the window of the office. And then we see Cash standing with both of his guns smoking. Lynch, however, is not happy about this and states to Cole, "You'll hang for this." But Cash tells him, "Did you really want to take that thing back with us?" And Lynch states, "That was Johnson." But Cash rebuttals by saying, that wasn't Johnson anymore. Craven wanted to make super soldiers, and he should have expected some monsters in the process. And then he tells Lynch that we're not heroes anymore and that he can list Johnson as MIA and, turn a blind eye to this the same way he does everything else. As we realize that things are not all well with Team 7 as we come to the Be Continued section of the book. We then reach the letter section of the issue called Debriefing, which was actually brought up in one of the letters for this issue. One of the writers said that, that's what you should call it, as that's what it's called when a military op is done and everyone gets debriefed. The writers of Team 7 thought that sounded cool, so they decided to stick with it. And most of these are just kind of praising the team for doing a good job on the book. However, one person does state, I think you guys should keep going with this after the miniseries, which is where we're told by the team that they're never going to make this into an ongoing series, but there will be other Team 7 miniseries in the future, which makes sense. Being that this is all prequel, it's kind of unnecessary to turn it into an ongoing series, and it really does function better as a mini series of showing, things that the members of Team 7 did in their past before where they are, in the current timeline being the early 90s, and how they got there. It really works much better in the miniseries format. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Boogerman, a pick and flick adventure. If you've never played Boogerman, it's okay. I mean, it's a generic kind of, side-scrolling platformer, and it kind of tries to sell itself on the gross out humor factor, which is there, but, it's kind of a one-trick pony, and there's definitely better games out there. I played Boogerman for a couple of hours, and, it was amusing, but not amusing enough that you're sitting down thinking to yourself, man, I want to just play this game for hours and hours on end. And that was Team 7 number 2. Overall, I thought it was a really fantastic issue. I really like the exposition that happens as we learn more about who a lot of these characters were in their younger years as opposed to who they became in the comic books that we saw that took place in the early 90s. I also really like how this book is really delving into the idea of just how, morally questionable it is to try and, make people gen active as a means to create super soldiers for the government, and is showing how, there's government programs that are really using humans as lab rats for their own or as a means to their own ends, instead of, necessarily just trying to work exclusively for the good of the public. And, it's just an overall interesting story, which is kind of surprising because I typically don't care for prequel stories, as, there's not really a whole lot of suspense involved in them. You already know what happens to the characters, as it's a story that takes place in the past. But this one just does a really good job of, filling us in on so many holes in the backstories of a lot of these characters, while also making itself relevant to the stories that are happening in the early 90s versus, this story that happens in the mid 70s. It's an interesting read, and it keeps you, wanting to turn the pages and find out more and learn more about who these characters were in the past, so that you can apply it to who they are in the future. But these are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary. You might think this book was terrible and boring and have hated the whole thing. But if so, that's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.